Hello, everyone. I'm Jenna Paone. Welcome to Lit Chick on a Mighty Blaze. I'm so thrilled today. We have the iconic, the incredible Kevin Kwan joining us. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be on your show.
Oh, thank you so much. We're so excited. We are huge fans of yours here at the Blaze. We're so honored that you took the time to speak with us today. And we're so excited to celebrate the paperback release of your latest book, Sex and Vanity. We're thrilled. Yay.
Thank you.
And welcome to everyone joining us. If you have any questions for Kevin, yes, I love that. We're going to talk about the cover. We were chatting about it before. If anyone has any questions for Kevin, please enter them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as possible at the end of the broadcast. So first of all, let's introduce you as though you need an introduction. You don't, but we're going to do it anyway because you're so fabulous. Kevin Kwan is the author of the international bestsellers Crazy Rich Asians, China Rich Girlfriend, and Rich People Problems. Crazy Rich Asians was a #1 New York Times bestseller and major motion picture and has been translated into more than 30 languages. For several weeks, the Crazy Rich Asians trilogy commanded the top 3 positions of the New York Times bestseller list, an almost unprecedented single author trifecta, and the film adaptation of Crazy Rich Asians became Hollywood's highest grossing romantic comedy in over a decade. In 2018, Kevin was named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Kevin's latest novel, Sex and Vanity, is a glittering tale about a young biracial woman who finds herself torn between 2 men, the waspy fiance of her family's dreams and George Zhao, the man she desperately is trying to avoid falling in love with. Sex and Vanity is an NPR, Marie Claire, and New York Post Best Book of 2020. It's a Good Morning America book club pick, a CNN Perfect Summer Read, a New York Times New and Noteworthy book, and Entertainment Weekly says Sex and Vanity is Kevin Kwan's most decadent yet. Kevin, welcome, and thank you for being here.
That was a mouthful. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, of course. I know everybody gets super embarrassed when I read their bios and but it's even more fun to be like, and he's just one of the most influential people in the world, which
it's even worse when they make you write a bio and I'm like, I don't know what to say,
Well, if you don't know what to say, then the rest of us are really screwed because our accomplishments are not on the Kevin Kwan level.
Oh, so please.
But hey, you know what it is? It's bios are the worst. Let's talk about the book because that's so much more fun.
Totally.
Congratulations on the paperback release. The book is wonderful. It's so gorgeous. Can you give us just your kind of basic elevator pitch about the book? I understand that it's a well, actually, we'll get to the homage part after, but give us your rundown of the book real quick.
I have a terrible rundown, but I will really try. Authors are always worse when they're talking about their own books.
Yeah.
For me, I really wanted to write this ultimate summer beach read.
Yep.
I wanted to write a book that I could really enjoy sitting, in my fantasy land by a pool somewhere, with a nice mojito at my side.
Absolutely.
Sweating under the sun. And really, I wanted to capture that feeling of what it's like to have your first summer romance. You definitely did that. And the sizzle and the desire, and then that really tender love.
Yeah.
That confusing adolescent love that just leaves an imprint forever.
Yeah. It's really sweet. I mean, the love story is just it's so heartfelt and it's so sincere. And you really do feel the struggle of how do you make this work under these challenging circumstances? The book is, and you do have that escapist, fun, decadent is really the word for it because it's so luscious. I mean, we'll talk about the descriptions and I know that's how you write and you have this omniscient, all-encompassing thought process and description process. But Sex and Vanity, really, it's an homage to A Room with a View. And I want to talk about that as a creative exercise. What inspired you to do that? And let's talk about the creative process a little bit behind it. How did that come about?
First of all, I love the original book. E.M. Forster's A Room with a View, one of my favorite books of all time, one of my favorite movies of all time. And so they were sort of seminal events in my life as a teenager when I first read the book and saw the movie, which made me fall in love with Italy. But number 2, I wanted a challenge, after writing this trilogy that was so much about my history, my homeland, my family. I wanted to go into totally different territory that wasn't mine, first of all. But I also wanted to try something new and different and challenge myself. And I think writing books that are homages are actually kind of the hardest thing to do, in my opinion, because you worship the source material. You don't want to reenact it and just retell it. You have to reinvent it.
Yeah.
And so for me, this became a fun challenge of like, how do I take this classic story that is so beloved by generations of people and make it mine and make it fresh and make it kind of like a nice wink to the original, but to give people a great time.
Yeah. So structurally, I mean, you stay close from a structural standpoint, but you've really reinvented the whole crisis, like the whole
I mean, the main points, the main points like Romeo and Juliet are there, right?
Yes.
The very main top points. It begins with a room swap. Right? They're swapping rooms because she doesn't have a view. And these, George Zhao, this nice boy, goes, you know what? I don't really care about the view. I've been here so many times. You know what I mean? Take my room. And there begins the problem. There begins the problem, right? The awkwardness, the sense of like, obligation, all that happens with it. So that setup is there. But then I totally subverted it. I felt, because the original Lucy Honeychurch in E.M. Forster's book, she is a complex creature that is really, to me, essentially struggling between the misfortune of being born at a very pivotal time in England. She was a teenager in 1908, which was kind of the dawn of the Edwardian age.
Yes.
Supposed to be this whole new era. England is the richest country in the world. The Industrial Revolution, the colonies, it's propelled it into modern life. And yet she's so restrained by the Victorian age, by the 100 years before, by the repression and the oppression of having grown up in this world of manners, of propriety, of appearances. And she's so trapped in it. And my Lucy is in a way dealing with her version of this.
Yes.
She's pulled in so many directions.
Right.
That she's a mess when we first meet her.
Right. And a
very composed mess, but yeah.
Yes. And if you haven't read the book, so Lucy is a young biracial woman who is caught between these two worlds of privilege. However, it's really an exploration of systemic racism, of bigotry in many different variations of prejudices, and all these layers, these microaggressions, and feeling as though she doesn't belong, and which world does she belong to. George kind of represents her Asian side, which she's always suppressed a bit around her very waspy father's family, and she's a woman of great privilege but not without problems. Can you talk about a little bit of why you felt that this was the right format for this discussion, and how you went about handling that, how you went about kind of building that in, because it's very effective. I mean, the whole book is really about this.
Yeah. In the very beginning, I wanted to do something that was different from the Crazy Rich Asians series, and the Crazy Rich Asians series was so much about Asians in Asia.
Yes.
And so I thought conceptually, what if we take Asians outside of Asia? What if we look at Asians in the West? Right? Because, immigration is life. Like Asians are all over the world now. There's a gigantic diaspora of people living around the world. And that poses its own issues and challenges. And to me, there's nothing that so much more perfectly exemplifies this than a woman who is biracial, who is Hapa. Hapa is the Hawaiian word for mixed, because she innately embodies two races, and has to reconcile and celebrate each of them, as a whole. So how does someone do that? How do you overcome those challenges? And it was very interesting for me because I have so many dear friends and relatives who are Hapa, who are mixed race all over the world. And you see, no one has the same experience. Everyone has a completely different experience based on their circumstances, where they grew up. Yesterday, so I did I hosted a happy hour for the Asian Hall of Fame.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And I decided, because I wanted to talk, they wanted to talk about my book. And I was like, why don't we take it to another level? Like, I would love to invite two amazing Hapa actresses. To me, these amazing Hapa heroines, Nancy Kwon, the great actress who happens to be my cousin, and Julia Nixon.
Fabulous.
Nancy grew up in 1940s and 1950s Hong Kong. Wow. And her mother was British. And her dad was from Hong Kong Chinese. Yep. He's a cousin of my grandfather's. And so I asked her, I was like, what was it like for you, growing up mixed race? At the time, they called her Eurasian. What was it like growing up Eurasian in Hong Kong in the 50s? Expecting her to give me a very different response. And she was like, oh, I had the most marvelous time. She's like, I went to Mary Knoll, which is like a very exclusive private school in Hong Kong. And she's like, at least half my classmates were Eurasian as well, So had a great time, not a problem. Enchanted childhood, moved to England, went to ballet school, and then became a huge international star, right? And then meanwhile, we have Julia Nixon, who is a Singaporean American actress. So she's half Singaporean. And I think her dad was American. And she grew up in Singapore in the 60s and 70s. And she said, Kevin, I felt like an alien. Because there were so few people that looked like me. And everywhere I went as a kid, people would point and make comments in Chinese or Malay. They would call me big eyes, because I had big eyes. So she had a completely opposite experience in what you think is a more progressive era.
Right.
And so she had quite a struggle as a child and into her teenage years, sort of reconciling and coming into her own and being able to celebrate, her biracial character. So fascinating to me.
And you really do explore all of those sides. I mean, no one in this book is without some sort of prejudice against someone for some reason. It's either, well, you're Asian or you're not Asian, or you have new money, or you're old money, or you don't have any money, but you're pretending to have money, or you're too weird. Like the layers are so important. And quite frankly, I mean, your work is so it's so successful on a massive mainstream level. And it couldn't be a more important time in this country where the Asian American community is under attack right now. I mean, there's a lot going on. There is a lot of racial violence against Asian Americans. There's a lot of just horrible racism and prejudice happening, and that being translated into physical acts. And it's so important to have work like yours, not only own voice as fiction, but work that is mainstream successful, that is, it's introducing whole new concepts to people, and it's just familiarizing and normalizing all of these things which should be normalized. And I'm
thank you for saying that. I mean, that's so well said, I think.
I mean, for me, like, I tend to believe that things like fiction, art, movies can have a bigger impact than necessarily, like, we need the people, we need the activists telling us things in a very clear way, but we also need art to teach us in a very subtle way, right? And that's what I think your work does, is because it just embraces all of both it embraces the attributes, it embraces, like the foibles, that you're just writing about people. You're writing about people who are full-fledged human beings that have flaws and good qualities and all of these things. And it's not like I'm writing Asian fiction, like I'm writing, but you are too. It's all very great. And I'm just wondering, for you, what do you hope to contribute to this larger discussion of making sure that we embrace diversity in the arts and celebrate people from all backgrounds? What's your hope in that?
I hope that in the work that I do, it just promotes understanding. And it really promotes the fact that we're all the same ultimately, that we all have universal experiences, and we all love in the same way. We all grieve in the same way. And we all share in the same way. And it's what I've seen now, with the success of Crazy Rich Asians, which is now in, I think, 39 languages, right? So I it's amazing to meet people from around the world that, from cultures I know nothing about. Poland, for example, who tell me that they love the book and that my cousin Eddie is just like their cousin, in Warsaw. They're like new blingy, like Tesla driving cousin, like it's
totally.
everyone can relate on some level, and you just realize ultimately, there is specificity in the culture, the specificity in the food, but beyond that, like human nature is human nature, and we're all the same. And the more we realize that, I think the more hopefully, we can be all nicer to one another and more understanding, to one another. That's my hope. Will that ever happen in this world?
If we can like kind of move people along,
but I feel like readers, people who read books, are just way cooler, first of all, but you learn so much. I learn so much from other cultures when I read their books. When I read Toni Morrison, when I read Maya Angelou, like I gain an understanding and a perspective that I've never seen before. So I'm always seeking books from other cultures, so I can understand,
I love it. And obviously, in terms of learning, I mean, your books are a learning experience 1,000% because they're so immersive. I mean, there's this wonderful.
I hope it doesn't feel like it's an SAT test.
No, it doesn't. I mean, I'm so into that. Like, I'm somebody who grew up like reading Vogue and Town and Country and things like that. And like, that was always a very there's this sort of, there's this very elegant, the only way I can describe it is I feel like I'm going to a museum when I read your books in the best way, because I feel like I learn, I might learn about a new artist that I didn't, I love when I go and I look someone up and, like for instance, in this book, you talk about, when you're talking about Isabel's wedding dress. And I was like, I think I know the Audrey Hepburn, inspiration for this dress that he's talking about in the book, but I'm going to go and look it up and make sure that I know which dress he's talking about. And it was the dress. And, looking at that and thinking like, there's just this lovely connection to, I mean, art, music, film, food, travel, you really do feel like you're on the vacation. And clearly you have this type of, memory or way of thinking that makes you very detail oriented. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and how you work those details into the book and into your writing in general, because you do have this very interesting way of describing everything, which I love. For me, it's like, I feel like I'm there. Can you talk about that as how you approach that as a writer?
So I was born with something that is both a blessing and a curse. I have a photographic memory.
Yep.
So I literally remember everything that I see and have seen. This does not extend to textbooks, unfortunately.
But, you're image oriented.
Yeah, I'm totally image oriented. So I remember parties that my parents took me to when I was 5 years old and up too late and seeing stuff I really shouldn't have been seeing. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I remember conversations. And then I remember visual details in magazines. I too, am like a sponge when it comes to magazines, and I love looking at photographs. And so when I see it once, it gets filed away and it comes out in the books.
Yeah.
And when I write, I also compose a scene cinematically in my mind.
Yep.
Not thinking that it's going to be a movie one day, but just really, I have to picture the space that they're in. Yeah. Whether it's a beautiful terrace in Capri, in a beautiful park overlooking a grotto, and I have to also think about where everyone's standing, what the light is like, what's around them. It's very five senses. What does the air smell like? Can you smell the hibiscus, the wild hibiscus in the air? And then what are they wearing? And so I dress my characters from top to bottom.
Right. And it in the process, does that kind of start, because you're clearly very location oriented, right? Like, I mean, every chapter we have a heading of exactly where we are, and then we really set the scene. Does that, do you start with setting and then populate it?
I start with plot.
You start with plot.
I start with story, you know, and then I think, okay, so where would be the most fun, glam place to set this?
Yes.
because let's make it interesting. Let's make it eye candy. You know, let's make it sumptuous. And then what can I dress them in? So like so I did add layers and layers, and then what are they drinking? What kind of champagne are they drinking? You know, and are they eating dessert, or are they having, you know, pigs in the blanket? You know, so I build every scene out. But it really does begin with what needs to happen here and what would be most effective for the plot.
And your background, I mean, you were a designer, you were a set designer, and you have, you know, this great visual background too. Can you talk a bit about how that informs your writing as well, and what that then translates to? You know, you say you think kind of directorially, you think like cinematically. What then, do you always have the movie in your mind? Did you always know that like you wanted Crazy Rich Asians to be a movie? Did you know, like, do you have feelings about this, or do you just kind of say, okay, this is how I'm seeing it, and then I write it? Is that like, how does that background in design kind of influence how you approach?
Well, I studied design and photography. Actually, I was a photography major at Parsons in New York, and so I myself, you know, spent a lot of time creating images, right? Literally, technically, and then so that's where I first approach it. And I also made my own movies, you know, nothing like what John Chu has done, of course, but I do think I always have a fantasy of a visual in mind, right? But I always say, like, if I were asked to direct Crazy Rich Asians, it would have been a very different movie visually. You know,
how so? Would it have been like darker?
It would have been, the colors would have been different. You know, John went into this area where it was just so candy colored, bright and sparkly. It was like an amazing little diamond, and I'm so glad he did, because I think my movie would have bombed, quite honestly, because I love sort of moodier Renaissance colors, you know, jewel tones, you know, so like mine would have been more like a Vermeer painting. You know,
a little hazy, a little
totally, moodier, definitely, you know, and then I would have focused on the drama, right? Whereas he focused on the comedy and the rom-com aspect of it. So, and I'm so glad he did, right?
Because, I mean, he did an amazing job, and like full disclosure, I feel like the way he did that movie is what the inside of my brain looks like. Like that's like I always say, glitter is my favorite color. Like that's like how I feel my brain is inside those bright colors. And it is interesting because, you know, Sex and Vanity has this very elegant, like, you know, I feel like it's very vintage. Like maybe it's the room with
it's like a Slim Aarons photograph.
Yeah, it is definitely a Slim Aarons photograph. And I hope that we get a movie of it one day. Do you think that there'll be a movie of Sex and Vanity one day?
Yeah. I think and really hope so. I mean, you know, Sony, so I'm very lucky that Sony picked up the film rights, and they are full steam ahead. We have an amazing screenwriter on the job that's adapting my book right now. And I'm supposed to see pages, I think, like any day now. And then, you know, next week we're having a meeting with directors. So like it's full steam ahead. So, you know, I think they're eager to film this as soon as they can safely film it. And of course, once the script is done and perfect, you know.
What is it like for you as the author of the book to then give it over to a screenwriter and allow them to kind of, because I know you've said in past interviews that you allowed that to happen with Crazy Rich Asians, and you really kind of, you have a very healthy outlook on it, I think, as a writer of feeling like, okay, it's time for me to let go of this, and I've got to let somebody else translate it into something else. Well, how do you approach that as a writer? And is it difficult at all for you?
You know, for me, it's like the minute you write a book and it gets published, it's really no longer yours, right? It's out there, it's in stores, you pick it up, you will have a completely different relationship with this book than I do. And I can't control that, you know. And just like with the film process, you know, I had an amazing friend who was a producer and had his own film company for many years. And when I was first working out the film deal for Crazy Rich Asians, this is back in 2013, when the producers came and, you know, they were making the deal, and then you know, when we literally had a contract, and I realized, oh, I don't get final say. I don't get any approval whatsoever, you know. And I was like, I don't know if I can let go of that control that much. Like, won't they at least consult me, you know? And my friend said, Kevin, you know, we were on the phone, but it's almost like he took me by the shoulders and he's like, get out of the way. That's what he said. And it was the best thing he ever said to me. He's like, you are lucky enough that a major studio, amazing producers want to make a movie of your book. You've already leapfrogged ahead of thousands of authors.
Yep.
You know, get out of the way and
Yeah.
let these people do what they do best.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm so glad I listened.
Yeah.
And in freeing myself from that, in giving up the control, I was actually invited to be part of it.
That's so great. Now, can you talk a little bit about how you influenced the movie? Because you had a big influence on the movie, particularly visually and from a location standpoint. Can you talk a little bit about that and what the role was in that?
Absolutely. You know, I was involved from the very beginning, you know. So I don't mean to be too dramatic in what I just said at the last point. You know, I wasn't given final approval. But I did become a producer. I was one of the producers of the movie, you know. And so I was part of the team from the very beginning. You know, we chose who we wanted to write the screenplay. We chose John Chu as the director. And then I was involved in casting, you know, every single character, you know, we talked about them, you know, pros and cons, who really embodied what I saw, but also what John Chu sees. And you realize it really shifts over to his vision as the filmmaker. You know, and once I trusted that vision and could see that he was only wanting the best for this, I could just really say, okay, go for it. Go for it full speed ahead. I'm going to say nothing. I'm literally going to say nothing. And I'm here to answer questions. I told him, you know, but you will never, ever hear me make a comment that second guesses you, you know. And I think his realizing that I really meant that meant a lot to him. It gave him the freedom to impose his creativity over this and his vision. And then I was consulted all the time, you know. So when it came to the set designs, you know, I sat down with the set designers and I sent them so many amazing photographs from my archive, you know, that they could look at of interiors I was thinking about. And then with the costumers, I did the same thing, you know, but I could go even deeper with them because you know, it's amazing how movies come together.
Yeah.
Nothing happens for 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And then finally they were like, go. And then they turn on the money spigot, you know. And that's how they make stuff happen so quickly because the amazing costume designer, she had 2 weeks to prep. She was sent to Malaysia.
2 weeks?
2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
A country she'd never been to. First, she got the phone call, right? And they're like, can you do it? Right. Then they're like, get you on a plane. So she gets on a plane and she's in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And they're like, okay, so now you have to dress this entire cast. And you know what? It's going to be a big cast. There's going to be 25 principal major actors in it, you know. And then there's going to be party scenes with 300-400 people. And they all need to look glam, super glam. And she was like, oh my God, how to do that? And, you know, she didn't know Kuala Lumpur. She was going around running. I remember her calling me the first day. She was running around to boutiques, you know, in like the super chic malls, trying to find clothes. And I was like, that's not gonna, you know, you're not gonna find it that way, you know. You can't do that. So we called in fashion consultants from around the world.
Perfect.
We called in, you know, I called in my designer friends. I called in friends who were jewelers. I'm like, you know, we need your help, you know. And it became a group effort. And thankfully there were so many amazing people that, you know, lent us clothes.
Clearly you pulled it off because I mean
lent us jewelry.
The fashion in that movie, I mean, the whole time I was watching it for the first time, I was just like sitting there, like Googling, like, how did I find a, like, you know, knockoff dress of this dress? You know, like looking at how do I find these things? I mean, it's so stunning. It really brings to mind things like Sex and the City, where you think of a piece of, you know, visual art that has such an effect on fashion. I mean, I grew up in the era of Sex and the City was really huge in college and at the end. And I mean, when I moved to New York after college, like I took all my fashion advice from Sex and the City. And I was like, you know, those were the labels that I was going after and, you know, kind of outfitting myself in because of that. Like I went to New York with like 15 pairs of stilettos thinking that I was going to wear stilettos all the time, everywhere, walking around the city.
Your poor knees. That's all I can say.
Yeah. I mean, but I did it for like 3 years. And then all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, nobody does this. Like nobody actually does this.
It's like, funny. Sex and the City, you know, and Devil Wears Prada were two movies that really came up over and over again because at one point Nina Jacobson, our producer, she's like, we gotta slay with the fashion. You know what I mean? Because it's such a fashion conscious book, and people read this book for the fashion. And also Asians, you know, crazy rich Asians will be watching this. You know.
Yep.
And these are people that really take it seriously.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's a
Oh,
religion
100%.
to them, right? So we have to get the details right. And, you know, Michelle Yeoh, who is a goddess, right? Michelle Yeoh, who plays Eleanor Young, is one of the most famous actresses in the world. She's one of the biggest stars in Asia.
Yep.
And she came in for her fittings. And, you know, I think Vogue, or was it Harper's? Someone did, after the movie came out, they did this huge rundown where they broke down everyone's outfits and named the dresses and the designers. And they did it really well. But, you know, Michelle had the cream of the crop, right? Yeah. She was in Christian Dior. She was in like primo. And then she looked at the jewelry that we had pulled for her.
Yeah.
And this is amazing jewels, by the way, from some of the top jewelers in the world that, you know, and we use a lot of amazing local jewelers also, you know, and that do stuff for like the Malaysian royal family, you know, sultans and princesses and stuff like that. And she was like, not going to cut it. She's like, oh,
jewels. Come on.
Not gonna cut it. She's like, I'm gonna wear my own jewels. Thank you very much. And so she got her own jewels, which, you know, she actually did wear some other pieces. Like, you know, I have a really dear friend, Michelle Ong, who has an amazing designer, Carnet. She designed Carnet, you know, one of the greatest designers in the world. And so she lent her these amazing like brooches and stuff, you know, the brooches, the floral brooches, and then she wears as a belt with yellow diamonds. Stunning, right? But most of the stuff was Michelle's own stuff, including the emerald ring, you know, that plays a very pivotal role.
Emerald ring.
That was her emerald, you know.
I mean, okay, I need to go to her house and try on her jewelry, please. Thank you.
But those were the people we were dealing with, you know. Michelle, who knows her jewels, and then Gemma Chan, you know, and Sonoya Mizuno, who, you know, was a model. So like these were complete fashion high priestesses, and they needed to be in the best. So it was a scramble. It was a mad scramble, but we made it happen.
We made it
happen. Yeah.
What to you, Kevin? Like, because I feel like what to you is luxury? Like what would be like your indulgence? Like what is, like, I'm so interested. I feel like you're
my
like,
personal
like
luxury.
What is your idea of luxury? Like if you were going to treat yourself, like what is the thing to you that is luxury?
So to me, time is luxury. You know what I mean? Having my own time, having my own space, being able to spend a whole day without checking my email. That to me is the ultimate luxury now. But beyond that, I like this morning, I posted a photo of a pan au chocolat. You know, that to me is an ultimate, what do they call it? It's an attainable luxury. Right? Because
everybody can go buy a pan au chocolat.
It's $250, right? But it's yet this decadent thing, this decadent creation, and when it's done right, it's done right, you know.
I love that.
So I think luxuries can come, you know, with any price tag, you know, but it's just having the time and kind of trying to practice the art of living, to sit down and have a moment to drink your tea, eat your croissant, and just kind of like enjoy the moment.
I love
before the craziness begins. Yeah.
I love it. Speaking of the craziness, I mean, you have so many film and TV projects going on right now, and you're still writing books. How do you balance your time? Are you somebody who singularly focuses on one project, or do you focus on 18 at once? And you know, how do you like to work in terms of that? Because you're at level, you know, you're at level way up here. So like when you get to the way up levels, how do you maintain your creativity and protect your creative habits?
That's a great question. So when it comes to film and TV stuff, you know, that's always a collaboration. TV projects especially, you know, they're huge teams, and there's writers' rooms. You're working with all these different writers. So that I can sort of be part of and help oversee and help inspire, but I don't have to be doing all the grunt work all the time. It's shared, right? So it's possible, and I've you know, found my pace in being able to maintain several different projects in the film space and the TV space at the same time. When it comes to a book, I need to go into my cave, right? So you know, Sex and Vanity, I wrote in 4 months. But I had to literally drop everything and say to all the various film studios and people I was working, I was like, you know what? I'm going away for 4 months to write a book, and I will not be answering my email. I can promise you that, because I need to really go deep when I'm in a book. Because to me, at least, it requires, you have to really get in there.
Yeah.
And get into the heads of so many of these characters and into the life and into the world. And I can't do that when I'm thinking about like 6 other plot lines for a TV show or something like that.
Yeah. So
I gave myself time. I had to carve out the time to do it. Yeah. And then came out of that, and now I'm back in the film and TV world for a little bit until I write the next book.
Yes. I want to ask about, but did you go somewhere special to write Sex and Vanity? Was it written
I really did. It's called that room up there in the corner.
It's called my office.
The corner of my office, which isn't really an office. It's like a corner of my dining table. Yeah.
See, everyone, look, Kevin is just like you. He writes at his dining table.
Yeah. I wanted to go to Capri to write this book. That was my little plot, you know, of like, oh, what can I do? I can go to Capri, rent a cottage somewhere, and write a book at a window facing the sea. Didn't happen. I just didn't have the time. And I also realized that I would be too distracted.
I was going to say, would you have written the book if you were in Capri?
No, I wouldn't have. And then, traveling, getting used to a place. Like I was just like, you know what? I only have 4 months.
Yeah.
I can just do it here, and people can deliver food to me. I know all the numbers, Uber Eats, it became like a military operation. So I needed to be at like base camp, right?
I love it. And obviously, like, we have to talk about Capri and New York and the Hamptons, which are the 3 main locations of this book. And I've heard in some other interviews you saying that that you have plans to continue this kind of as another series, focusing on then London and Paris after. But can you talk about your relationship to Capri and to New York? And you have, in your lovely dedication at the front, you really emphasize both places as being very near and dear to your heart. Can you talk about your connection to these places and why you wanted to feature them?
I mean, Capri is just my favorite place in the whole world.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I mean,
I have to. Have you been?
I have.
Yeah. So it's so beautiful, right? There's something that just feeds your soul when you're there. It's beyond. It's mythical in a way, because there is no bad angle on the entire island. No matter where you're standing, it's beautiful. Just the way, the geography of the island itself, its relationship to the ocean. But it's not just beautiful on the surface. It's beautiful deep down. The people are amazing. And then the more you get to know it, and I've been lucky enough to go, numerous times, the more I go, the more I discover yet another facet that's more and more beautiful. So it's become like my go-to summer place, and so I wanted to set part of the book there. Yeah. And then, of course, New York, I spent 20 years living there. Over 20 years, so New York has been home to me, and I still consider it home. I still feel like a visitor here in LA in many ways, because when you've grown up in a city, New York really like made me who I was, and it was during that whole Sex and the City era, the 90s, where I really came of age in New York and had an amazing time, and also tragic times, like everything, like all my growing up years and formative years were there. And then, of course, when you are in New York, what does everyone do in the summertime?
Hamptons.
They go to the Hamptons, and sorry to be a cliche, but I did the same, like I was one of those migratory birds that every weekend I would, if I couldn't scam a ride out, I was, on the jitney.
On the jitney.
Yeah.
You could write a whole novel just on the jitney.
Oh, gosh. Can you ever? Can you ever?
It's one of the most interesting little, universes of itself, like the Hamptons jitney, like who's going, because you have, you have everybody kind of there together, and it's this really interesting, mashup of personalities and
totally
economic classes and all of these things.
That's a great idea for a book. You should write it, or someone out there should write it.
We'll call it Jitney. Kevin, you're welcome. If you want to write it with me, you're totally welcome. We'll do it. It'll be great. We'll turn it into a movie. It'll be fabulous. But speaking of, so, we can't have a Kevin Kwan book without knowing that it's going to be about the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. I mean, we're talking about major money here in your books. We're talking about, people that are the most well-traveled, the most well-educated, this really, interesting cross-section of the world. And you do it in this way that is very delightful, where you both celebrate and you kind of skewer the eccentricities of this world. And clearly you have a connection to this world. You're from this world. You know this a little bit.
No.
Not so much.
So I'm Crazy Rich adjacent. Really, truly.
Me too. I'm Crazy Rich adjacent. But
I get to peek into this world every now and then, but I'm so nowhere near part of it. I can promise you that.
Way, you know the world. You're at least you've had the foot in the door, and there's
dozens of zeros missing from my bank account to get there. I can promise you that. I'm a writer, not a hedge fund broker, So.
Yeah. No, I feel you. Don't worry. I feel you. But like one of the things you do in Sex and Vanity is like every time we meet a new character, we get their educational background, which is like the most fun thing. Like you give us your it was we get the kindergarten, we get the grade school, we get the boarding school, we get the university, and then we get their grad degrees if they have any. And that's just like kind of a perfect way that you use sort of humor to kind of to both humanize and to kind of like poke a little bit of fun. What do you think? So how do you approach rendering these characters who kind of have absurd wealth and entitlement in a way that also makes them relatable, human, makes us root for them? What's your approach to that?
It varies character by character, right?
Yeah.
For me, it is trying to find the humanness in these people.
Yeah.
And mind you, there is the 0.1%. In my book, but there's also some people who are not of that world, So, and I like to have a bit of a balance, But it really is dependent on the character. Lucy comes from this world of privilege, right? She was born into this very blue blood Park Avenue family. So she wears it very lightly, and as a result, she's never had to really be concerned about money.
Yeah.
And she's comfortable in that milieu. It's just all she knows,
Yeah.
And it's interesting because if we rewind to Crazy Rich Asians, not to keep making references to that, but some people had gripes with Nicholas Young, the hero of my books, played by Henry Golding in the movie, so beautifully.
We've seen a lot of comments saying, is Henry Golding nice and will he marry us? So
unfortunately, he's taken. He's got a beautiful wife, Liv Lowe, and they just had a beautiful baby.
Oh, congratulations.
So totally. But people were like, why is he so clueless?
Yeah.
Why isn't he prepping Rachel more for like the family and what she's going to be going into? And I'm just like, but this is all he knows.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is just his reality. That's just his cousin. He doesn't know the cousin is going to be queen, bitch, ice queen, and treat her like dirt, whatever. These are just, it's his world. So he has no frame of reference outside of it.
Right.
Just like Lucy, she's not clueless.
No.
Right. And she's not from this garish new money world.
Right.
Where it's all about, she's not a snob. And she's also not into fashion. I don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah.
She has nice clothes.
Yeah, she has nice clothes, but they're not super important to her. She's
not super important.
Very matter of fact.
She's not even a fashionista. Yeah. You know what I mean? But she just grew up in a world of nice clothes, But then you have Cecil, this other character.
I love Cecil.
I love Cecil too, right? He was so fun to write.
He's one of my favorites. Yeah. He's just like the best.
And but for me, like I also wanted to look at, so he's like a total snob.
Yeah.
Like, but what is at the root of the snobbery? Because I really feel like people who are snobs are it's so deeply rooted in insecurity.
Yes.
Because if you were a secure person, you wouldn't be a snob.
100%.
Right? You wouldn't have to feel like you need to lord over your privilege to the rest of the world, but he innately embodies that, right? And so we go back to his backstory, and you do find out what makes him, in a very subtle way. You draw the line. So, with each character it's different. And some characters I love to have more fun making them nasty, and some others, it's a balance, I find, but ultimately I'm trying to humanize them. I'm trying to let people understand and also demystify the privilege, because you see, beyond these velvet ropes, they're all too human, and how much money they have and how much social position they have doesn't buy you happiness at all.
No, and that's a big takeaway of your books is like, I mean, you would think that these people would have no problems, but everybody has, more money, more problems. But what now, and going on that too, but you also you really use humor, and you use kind of this tongue-in-cheek satire. There's this very satirical and almost detached, but it's a comically detached kind of tone in a lot of your writing, where it's just sort of like, you even kind of you sort of sometimes correct the characters, especially in Sex and Vanity. So like somebody will say something, they'll make an outlandish claim, and you'll be like, actually, that's not right. Like you have this omniscient kind of narrator voice, which like, I imagine you.
Do you know where that came from?
I want to know. That's where I want to know where that came from.
So I've noticed something. A lot of times when you're around rich people, they think they know everything. They feel like their money has somehow given them an authority to be an authority on everything. So I've been in rooms, I've been at dining tables with people where they're just making the most outlandish claims. And because they're rich, most people there will believe them like it's gospel. I'm just like, not so sure about that. You know what I mean? Like, not only is it inaccurate and not factual, it's grotesque. So
so wrong.
I'm not going to call them, sometimes I do actually call them out on it. I try to challenge them, and then I never get invited back again. But my revenge was these footnotes where I can really take some of these characters and go, okay, not right.
I love it. It's so great. I mean, it's such a, like, that's one of my favorite things about the book, to be honest. Like, it's one of my favorite things. And I love, you're so knowledgeable about so many subjects. I love hearing about.
Not really. I just have Google. That's all.
I was going to say, was that like, what was your research process like for that? Was it just like making sure you Googled it and like making sure, do you have a fact checker for all of these things?
I do my own fact checking, but then also it's interesting, the publishers, they hire these amazing copywriters who are a species unto themselves, and they'll fact check me. And then a lot of times I have to argue with them and they'll be like, no, this is not accurate. I was like, no, you're not accurate because you're only checking Google. The truth is, don't believe everything you see on the internet, and they'll have to justify. Then I have to justify why. It's like, no, that Wikipedia entry you looked up was not correct.
And I know the answer. How different is this book then? Like, so going back, how different is this book from the original book you started? Like, when you, as a writer, are you one of those people that you kind of wait and make sure each section is the way you want it to be before moving on? Or do you do a messy first draft and then go back and edit? Are you just, what's your process like in terms of actually sculpting the book into the final product?
So I write my chapters first draft, and I do go back and I polish, and one thing affects the other, right? So I never know where I'm going to go. Like I don't have an outline, I don't have a plan, I just have a little jumbled mess in my head. And so I keep I keep shaping it as I go along. And I try to let the characters take me where they want to go. So this book turned out way different than what I was expecting. I was going to do a very faithful homage to a review. And as you know, it didn't turn out that way. My book veers really into very different directions and goes into other deeper tentacles of stuff. And I'm so glad, but I really let the characters speak to me and tell me where they want to go and the stories they want to tell.
Nice. And we're going to go way back. We just have a few more minutes of your time. And I know you're a busy man. So if anybody has any questions, just make sure you pop them in real quick. But take us way back, Kevin. I want to know. So you were this visual artist and this visual thinker. What was the thing that made you say, okay, I'm going to translate that into words? What was the moment that made you decide writing now at this moment in my life? Did you have a moment, or was it a gradual evolution as an artist? And is it something, do you still think of yourself as a visual artist as well as a literary artist? I'd love to hear about your actual kind of journey of how you became a writer.
Well, I actually started out in writing first. So my first degree in college was in creative writing and journalism. So, and I graduated in 1994 in the middle of a recession, and I realized there's just no way I'm going to make a living as a writer. The one local paper in Houston that I wrote for, the Houston Press, was going out of business.
Great.
And I was already an unpaid contributor, so I was like, I'm going to be even more unpaid now, Yep. But I always knew there was this visual side to me. Like, I've always had this dichotomy of there's the person that loves to write, but there's also this intensely visual person. So how to satisfy that? So I thought, you know what? Since I'm unemployed, since, I'm unemployable, I'm going to go to art school and scratch that itch. And maybe if I have a visual intelligence and I combine that with my ability to write, something can happen and I can make a living, like maybe working on websites or something, like I just,
maybe I can do something. Yeah. Maybe
I can do something.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's when I went to art school and photography. And then that led me into a whole other world for 15 years, and it was amazing. It was truly amazing. I ended up having my own creative consulting business where I was able to work on book projects where I was the producer of these projects. Yeah. I was managing the graphic designers and the photographers and also the writers. And I could just, because I understood how to work with each of these people and speak their language, but once a writer, always a writer, right? So, and I always had that itch. Like, I always wanted to write the great American novel.
Yeah.
Every writer has that dream, right? Yeah. And so that brewed for about 20 years, of like, I want to write this book. I want to write this book. Yep. I don't really know what I want to write, but it's going to be damn good, And then my father got very ill in 2009, and I went and spent a lot of time with him, in his final year. And that just really got me thinking. It was the first time I really thought about my past, my childhood, my family. And I knew there was a story to be told there. I knew that there were memories I wanted to keep and hold dear to me. Yeah. And so I just started writing. It was a very gradual thing. Like, one day I was like, I'm going to just try to write. And they all started out as short stories. This was supposed to be a book of short stories. So, and each chapter was about a different person.
Yes. And you wrote a poem, right? Was there a poem
in college
in college that led to Crazy Rich Asians, right?
It did, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I mean, it's interesting because back in college, you're trying to do really creative, alternative, cool stuff, right? Yeah. So, and I was sort of focusing on poetry, and I was trying to do very experimental, ekphractic poetry. I don't know if you know what that is.
Yep. Yeah, actually,
totally. Yes. Yeah. So, and then one day I had to, an assignment was due, right? And so in 15 minutes, I just wrote this poem. I don't know where it came from. And it was really throwaway. It was called Singapore Bible Study.
Love it.
And it was meant to be just this little thing. And, we had to read our work in class aloud to the rest of the seminar group. Of
course.
And yeah. And this poem, which I just thought was like a nothing poem, people were fascinated by. They were like, what are you even talking about? That was, and there were so many people came up with questions later, my professor loved it. He suggested some light edits, but then it ended up being published in 3 different anthologies and journals.
Wow.
The one poem that I didn't really care about. And so it's interesting. So that happened. I filed it away. And then 20 years later, I was like, I'm going to take this story of these women at a Bible study, where the Bible study is really an excuse to gossip and look at jewelry and trade stock tips, and complain about their sons. And it became the chapter, of Eleanor with her friends, talking about Nick. And I remember after writing that one chapter and turning into this sort of comic farce, I was like, there is something here. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah. I love that.
So that's what I
love
did.
That I love that you, it was like it was in you all along, right? And that story was in there from the very beginning, and it kind of needed time.
You just needed to discover it, right? And it took 15 years of, like I couldn't have written that book fresh out of college. I had to move to New York. I had to go to art school. I had to go through all these adventures and tunnels and labyrinths, into life. Before I could write this book. That's why I meet so many young writers who are so impatient to and it's like, what, more power to you if you can do it now. But there is such a thing as time and letting ideas marinate and living that really helps to inform your work.
I love that. I love everything about that. Kevin, what are you working on right now? Can you give us a little bit of a hint? And what do you hope to tackle next as an author, as a creative? Let's look into the future a little bit.
Yeah. So I just finished my first screenplay.
Awesome.
That completely original screenplay that I wrote with a friend. So I had a co-writer, but that was a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
And then I have 2 different TV projects that are in development, with different places. And for me now, especially after Crazy Rich Asians, I really see for myself the importance of, if I have any power to help create things that showcase diversity, that give work to amazing actors that deserve to be seen, and to help just add to the culture in that way, I'm going to try doing it. I've been beaten down, of course, in the last 5 years trying to make it in Hollywood. So many projects have just not worked out. But that is Hollywood. You got to have like 20 balls in the air and one ends up going through the hoop, So I'm still trying to make work that moves people, and brings them joy and also makes them think.
Yeah. Fabulous. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much. I do want to encourage everyone to go out and grab Sex and Vanity. Hopefully grab the paperback. Yes. Can we see the beautiful cover? Oh, sorry. We didn't talk about the cover. Can you tell us really quick about the cover? Because this is why we're here. Can you tell us a little bit?
It wraps around, actually.
Oh, there's a great connection between the cover artist, right? And Lucy, our main character of the book.
So, this was created by Autumn Whitehurst, who is this amazing illustrator based in Brooklyn, and she is Hapa, I believe. She's biracial, so it's interesting how she channeled this. I think it might even look like her.
She's like, I'm just gonna draw myself. It's so
totally
great.
But she really captured, I think, the spirit of Lucy, the spirit of Capri. I love the colors. It's so fresh, right? And so beautiful. And I would read this book. I really would read this book.
Oh, 100%.
And I never read my own books.
And do you want to give a shout out to an independent bookstore at all that might have either, just a local favorite or, all of the bookstores? We love to encourage people to go and buy them from indies and support our bookstores.
Absolutely. There's so many great bookstores, especially the indies across America. I think they really hold the seeds to our culture, really. So everywhere I go, I always every new town I go, I look for the indie bookstore. In LA, I love Romans and Book Soup. In San Diego, I love Warwick's.
Awesome.
In New York, there's Three Lives bookstore. I can go on.
You're like, this all of the
Politics and Prose,
Yes.
Houston, there's Brazos bookstore. I can go on.
We love it, Kevin. This was so fun. Thank you so much for taking the time. We know you're a busy guy. Congratulations. Thank you so much for creating your beautiful books, for making this great art, for giving us all these gorgeous stories.
Truly a pleasure. Are there questions? Do we want to do questions,
are there any
or do you have to run?
We can take some questions. We had some, I think, that came in a little back. I didn't want to take your time, but we can do a couple. Can we have some info about the China Rich Girlfriend movie, asks Alex.
Well, it's interesting. I just actually gave an interview to Variety magazine this week about it. We are, in development with the sequel to Crazy Rich Asians, and we're just trying to get the script perfect. The interesting thing, the great thing, and the interesting twist is that when they did Crazy Rich Asians, and the way they tied the bows, they tied them too neatly. They resolved the Astrid story for the movie, and then they also kind of resolved the Rachel Nick story. And as you know, that does not happen in the real book, right? So they kind of wrote themselves into a corner. So they had to find some time to write themselves out of it, and I think they have. They've come up with brilliant solutions now. But I feel like the entire team has felt like, because the first movie was so impactful, right? The pressure's on, and we want this to be even better than the first, if that's at all possible. I'm knocking on wood. So we've just really taken our time, to make this sequel the best it can be. But so it's in the works. We're perfecting the script, and then we're gonna go shoot it.
Awesome. And speaking of sequels, I see a question from Kimberly too earlier in the chat. I just finished Sex and Vanity, and I'm wondering if Kevin is planning a sequel or trilogy with these characters, which I think you are. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I am. It's a trilogy, but it's an unconventional trilogy in the sense that the story of Lucy is pretty much wrapped up.
Yep.
She might make appearances in the future 2 books, but it's I call it the Cities trilogy, because it's really about the cities. The cities, I feel like, are characters in the books. And so the next book is going to be set in London. The final book will be set in Paris, and each book will also be an homage to another great work of fiction that I love. So that's going to be the connective tissue between them, the cities, and the fact that, they were all inspired by amazing, amazing authors and books.
I love this. And we've got another question up here. From Nancy. In the writing, do you concentrate on character traits rather than race, or do you start? So I guess what she's asking is, when you have a character, do you first assign them a racial identity, or do you kind of know their racial identity, or does their racial identity become clear to you because you're looking for a character to do a particular thing?
That is so interesting. I've never thought about that. I really focus on the character first, but race is so much a part of your character.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's sort of baked in. How you see the world is oftentimes informed by where you were born, how you were raised, who your family is. So it to me, they're sort of interconnected, and I can't really see them separated, but my focus is really on character. Most of all,
and you know what? I'm going to ask you one more just from me before we let you go. What's the best writing advice you've ever gotten, and what's the worst writing advice you've ever gotten?
Oh, wow. The best writing advice I've gotten is really to, write your truth. To really kind of like mine the well of your experience, and because only you have your story, and that's the one truly original thing that you have. And so when you're trying to write for others, when you're trying to write to impress others, like a critic or a class, invariably it trips you up. Can't say it can't be done brilliantly. Some people can, but for me, it took 20 years for me to finally write my truth. For so long I was really writing other truths that weren't my own, in an effort to write cool stuff, And isn't it amazing that the one thing that I thought no one would be interested in, turns out they are.
Turns out everyone is interested in.
It's, and like so many of my friends, this book took them by surprise, when
really,
even my closest friends were like, "You wrote a novel, and it's about what?" Because they, I was like the most un-Asian, like when they're giving out badges for Asianness, I'm the worst. You know what I mean? Like, so they're like, you truly. So like they're like, you're, like, what are you doing here? You don't even speak Mandarin. Like we're in restaurants. I go to restaurants, in New York, and I'm the only one that doesn't use chopsticks. And all my friends use chopsticks, and they're all white. You know what I mean? And I'm the one that's like, can I get a fork and a spoon, please? You know what I mean? Like, so it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like where you find and the worst advice I've been given. It wasn't really advice, but very interestingly enough, there was someone that I really admired as a writer who took one of my poems and parodied it. And in a very harsh and cruel way.
Ooh.
And it really shocked me, first of all, but then it shut me down. And I think it's what made me go, okay, I can't reveal myself anymore.
Yeah.
I have to write really minimalistic, surgical, precise poetry that has nothing to do with what I know. You know, because then I'll be respected as a writer.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a while. Like, I'm going to write about Donald Judd and Martha.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to write about suicide.
Yeah.
And, you know, this person parodying a poem, which, by the way, it just occurred to me for the very first time. This is like a big aha moment for me. It was a poem about Capri.
Oh!
It was a poem about Capri.
Full circle.
Full circle. I swear to God, I'm just remembering it now. And I literally think I became so embarrassed of this that I threw it away. I don't even have a copy of it anymore. But it was a lush poem that celebrated the sensuality of Capri and temptation and lust and forbiddenness and guess what? Revenge. Not really. People... Karma.
Yep. Karma. Do not listen to all of the naysayers who are telling you that you can't be who you are.
Be who you are.
Be yourself. Kevin, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you to everyone for joining us. I know folks are going to be watching after the fact too. Feel free to sign up for our Mighty Blaze newsletter to make sure you never miss a great interview. And we'll be back next week with Lit Chick. I believe we have Jamie Brenner on next week. So join us at noon again. Kevin, once again, congratulations on the paperback release of Sex and Vanity. Thank you for joining us.
You are so amazing. Thank you.
You are so amazing.
Such an amazing hour.
You are the best. Thank you.